Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, if you were watching the Daily Politics on Wednesday, you may remember this exchange during Prime Minister's questions.
Some of my constituents who've had their tax credits suddenly stopped by Concentrix have been accused of being in a relationship with the previous tenants of their homes, who they've never even met. And some cases, they've been accused of being in a relationship with their own members of their own families and told to prove that they're not. This Kafkaesque situation is causing deep distress and hardship amongst working mothers in my constituency. Is this what the Prime Minister means by being on the side of working people? And what's she going to do to put it right?
Well,
Prime Minister.
The Right Honourable Lady raises an issue which is of concern to members across this House, i.e. making sure that those who are being assessed properly and the right decisions are being taken. The Department for Work and Pensions is looking at that whole process of what should be done and how those assessments should be undertaken.
Prime Minister replying to Maria Eagle, the Labour MP. Now, what was all that about? Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, HMRC, contracted the US company Concentrix to look for fraudulent or incorrect tax credit claims back in 2014. The contract, which was worth up to £75 million to the company over 3 years, was meant to save the government $1 billion in tax credit overpayments. The company is believed to check details, including council tax bills, the electoral register and financial records, to try and identify inconsistencies or cheating. HMRC say Concentric has identified £280 million of fraud and errors so far. But MPs have been inundated with requests for help by constituents who've had their tax credits taken away. When claimants tried to challenge the decisions, many found it impossible to contact Concentrix. HMRC say that only 10% of calls were answered on some days, a bit like calling HMRC. On the 14th of September, HMRC announced that they would not extend the Concentric contact beyond May 2017. Clearly, they did think something was up. And 181,000 cases have now been handed back to HMRC, who say that they've dealt with 149,000 of them. Giving evidence to the Work and Pensions Select Committee earlier this month, HMRC said that there have been 15,000 appeals so far, 90 to 95% of which have been successful in overturning the original, I suppose, Concentric decision. Maria Eagle joins us now from Liverpool, and I should mention that we did ask the Treasury and HMRC for an interview with someone actually responsible for this, but surprise, surprise, they declined. Let's go to Maria Eagle now. Are you relieved, gratified even, that HMRC is now back in charge of this?
Well, I'm not sure all of this mess is Concentrix's fault. I mean, it's HMRC's fault as well. It was they who passed over this 1.5 million pieces of information. And the quality of some of it seems to be so poor. And, you know, HMRC say in their charter that the people that deal with them have a right to be believed. The upper tier tribunal says in law that it must be HMRC that prove there's a problem. Yet what's happened to my constituents is that they don't get paid. They then get a letter that says that they have an undeclared partner, but the letter doesn't say who it's supposed to be. They then have to prove that they don't. And this is a complete mess that's the making of both HMRC and Concentrix. Some of the cases that I have been dealt with by HMRC after the cases have gone back to them. And so I'm not convinced that this is entirely Concentrix. There's a lot of buck passing. But the reality is that my constituents who are vulnerable financially, they're young mums with very little spare cash, are being forced to stand to the pressure of this. And it's really completely outrageous.
Well, I want to come back to the human cost of this in a moment and just hear some of the problems of your constituents. But before I do, can I just get it clear that although Concentrix clearly has made mistakes, otherwise they wouldn't be losing so many appeals, and obviously haven't handled this that well, or they wouldn't be losing the contract. But HMRC are guilty too, because it was their job to monitor, regulate, enforce what Concentric was doing. Is that your case?
That I think is true, and I think that HMRC have also, I think this contract, which passes over on a payment by results basis, you only get paid if you save money, if you stop claims, in other words. You then hand over the power to Concentrix, not only to make decisions, but also to do the mandatory reconsiderations of those decisions. And this appears to be being done without any thought of the impact that it's going to have on very vulnerable young mums. I mean, all the cases in my constituency are young mums who are working part-time and don't have much spare cash.
Right, so let's come on to just some of the examples, not individual ones, but the trend as to you were picking up from your constituencies. Am I right in thinking that one of the things Concentrix did, if you're on tax credits, perhaps as you say as a single mum, they then tried to check whether you were cohabiting with somebody, whether there was a partner in the house or whatever. And if they did establish that, or to their satisfaction, may not have been accurate, but they did, they then just stopped the tax credit. Is that what's been happening?
Yes, and what's been happening is that the first thing that people knew about it, the recipients, was that they simply didn't get paid. Then they tried to get through on the phone, couldn't get through, would then get a letter saying you have an undeclared partner, but it didn't say who that undeclared partner was supposed to be. Then when we've got to the bottom of it, the allegation is that it was somebody who lived in the same house 4 or 5 years previously, often of the same sex, by the way, who then my constituent never even knew. And so
I believe one of your constituencies were having an affair with Joseph Rowntree, who died in 1925.
That wasn't my constituent. It was a case in Birmingham, but
right.
Joseph Rowntree's a 19th century Quaker.
No, I got that bit.
How on earth that an individual is supposed to work out that is the person that they're supposed to be cohabiting with in order to prove that it isn't?
Now, clearly,
that they're not. It's ridiculous.
Clearly, mistakes have been made, and big mistakes, and at some human cost and unnecessary, particularly if you cut somebody's tax credit off and you don't even tell them, and they don't know why, and they then can't find out why. Do you accept, though, that there was some fraud and error going on? I understand that they did identify £280 million of fraud or error, and that HMRC have validated that bit was right.
I think that we all want tax credits to be paid in the proper amount to the right people, and nobody will defend fraud or error. I suspect that there's far more error than there is fraud. I mean, I've had cases where the HMRC have accepted that they've inputted an address wrong, and as a consequence, people have had their money stopped and had to borrow money, and have then been offered £5 a week of the money back. So it'll take weeks and months for them to get the money back that they were entitled to through no fault of their own. Now, this is not a sensible way of administering tax credits.
Given that this has clearly caused pain among members of society who are already struggling to make ends meet and are living on small income, that's why they're getting tax credits to top up an insubstantial income. What do we do next? Do we just leave it at this now that it's gone back to HMRC and they're sorting through it and putting it right? I mean, hasn't there got to be some culpability for this at some stage?
I think so. I think we need to know far more about why this has gone wrong. And we've seen a lot of buck passing between HMRC and Concentrix, the contract being treated like a hot potato. I think that the parliamentary reviews into it are a good thing. But what has been forgotten about here by both HMRC and Concentrix is the vulnerable nature of the individuals themselves who are entitled to this money. There's been a breach of the HMRC's own charter, and people are being left to try and manage. I've had to hand out food bank vouchers, people have gone into debt, there have been ongoing issues for people who've got into arrears with their rent and all kinds of difficulties. I've got constituents who are being threatened with eviction. This is not acceptable as a way of making savings and making sure that fraud and error is reduced in benefit administration, and something really does need to be done about this. The vulnerability of these individuals has to be acknowledged, and they cannot be allowed to carry on being made the scapegoat for this nonsense and this buck passing between HMRC and Concentrix.
Maria Eagle, thank you for being with us today on the Daily Politics and going through this issue. Paul, it's not been a great week for government in a way when Maria Eagle brought this up in PMQs, and clearly it's the sort of thing that goes on under the radar until somebody brings it up. They've seen the Home Office get into a real mess over what are child migrants and what aren't. They didn't seem to be able to tell the difference at some stage. Not been a great week for government competence, has it?
No, and also don't forget this is a huge bureaucracy at work, and sometimes the consequences of the way the state interacts with individuals, it's messy and often incompetent, let's be honest. There's a large degree when it comes to public services of this going on. But ultimately, the political problem for Theresa May is she's supposed to be a new kind of government on the side of the striving classes, the just coping classes.
Which is who Maria was talking about.
They're exactly the sort of people that are being affected by this kind of thing. And that's why you see people like Damien Green saying, let's have a look at this again. And don't forget, I think he's been instrumental in making sure this contract has ended early, as well as the HMRC. Similarly, his idea of reviewing the way benefits are assessed for the disabled. You know, there is some movement in government that they've got to do more on this.
I can see, I bring you in as an outside company to look at the tax credit situation, and you get a fee. But I then say you'll get more if you can find the more you can find who are cheating or the more errors. In a sense, doesn't that give you a perverse incentive to do that? I
was just going to use that very phrase. It is a perverse incentive, and it will encourage any outsourcer to perhaps not give as much leeway as they might have done on some cases.
It's remarkable that they didn't even tell people before they withdrew their tax credit. I mean, you would think that's a breach of proper government, maybe even human rights. I mean, it's just wrong.
Well, that's another part of it, and it will have to be investigated. No, I will just add to what Paul was saying about sort of political problems for May. She has allowed herself to be painted and portrayed as this sort of safe pair of hands. And if you have more of these scandals of competence in government, it
out inquiry
won't play well for her.
No, exactly. All right, we need to move on. That's an important story, though, that we did in some depth.
I've been getting away with it all